Willie, super excited to have you here. Thank you for taking some time with me today.
Great pleasure, Kristel. Good to be with you.
So, you have a lot of experience in leadership, and I'm really excited for you to share some of your wisdom with me and the listeners today. And for those, Willie, who are not familiar with your background, can you share a little bit about yourself and what led you to writing this new book, Leadership, the Inside Story, Time Tested Prescriptions for Those Who Seek to Lead?
Sure. Um, well, first thing to know is I was born and raised in South Africa, a faraway
Wow.
place, southern tip of Africa. And my first career was as a lawyer. I studied law, practiced law in Cape Town for 5 years, Cape Town in South Africa. Um, Became very interested in the business world. A lot of my clients happen to be from major companies seeking not just legal advice, but also perspectives on their business challenges. I became very interested in that and left the legal profession to join the corporate world. I started off with Unilever, a global consumer products company. I was lucky enough to get opportunities for a global and international career. They sent me to various countries around the world, which was great for me. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Australia, the Netherlands, the UK twice, and then ultimately to the United States. And I had various CEO positions with the Unilever Group running their foods enterprises in the UK and in the USA and in South Africa. Subsequently, I became the CEO of other businesses in the US, Seagram USA, which is a liquor company at the time, the largest in the USA. I was president of Tropicana and then president of Sterling Winthrop's consumer health business. So that was my corporate career. And then I made a transition. I was very interested in learning, particularly organizational learning and the challenges of leadership in a changing world.
Mhm.
I connected with Columbia Business School, and ultimately got invited to teach there, and then got this appointment as the professor of the practice of management at Columbia, which has been a thrilling journey. And I've been at Columbia now with this appointment for 26 years. So three
Wow.
careers, first as a lawyer, then as a corporate executive, and then ultimately as a teacher and consultant to a number of companies. Now, that's given me what I think about as a tremendous learning laboratory, spanning various countries, dealing with various companies with different challenges, observing different leaders, both national leaders like Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and observing corporate leaders and not in the not-for-profit sphere as well, where I was once the chairman of a not-for-profit entity, and then teaching, and to teach us to learn. So eventually I wrote a series of blogs along the way, over 20 of them. And my wife, who's my cheerleader, eventually said to me, "You've got a book there." And I said, "No, I've got a series of blogs." He said, "No, there's a lot of connecting
Mhm.
tissue, a lot of common themes. You have a book, the makings of a book, the structure of a book." And I eventually took her advice and put it together as a book, and met Carl Weber, this wonderful publisher, who's published it, and it's now out on the market. So that's basically my background and my story and the motivation for writing the book.
Wow. So you have had different experiences around leadership from all these different angles, which is incredible. So I would love to hear, Willie, what do you think? What's the secret sauce for a really incredible leader? And I've done different research into this. I've had my own personal experiences. So I
Wow.
definitely have some of my own opinions around this, but I'm
Yeah.
really curious what yours are. What do you think are some of the really big things that jump out when you're looking at a really phenomenal leader?
I think the basic truth about leadership to understand and to work with is that leadership is about people. Work happens through people. Great work happens through inspired people. That's the essence of leadership. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my education on that point. When I was first appointed to a CEO role within Unilever, running their foods business in South Africa, I felt like a novice. I really hadn't run a company before. I was a little bit overawed by it all. I'd come up through the marketing channel. And I thought there were a number of gaps in what I needed to learn, which I went about trying to deal with. And I had a theory of leadership at the time. And that theory said, well, it's all a bit like a game of chess. You have to make the right moves strategically. And I was intrigued by factors like business analysis, brand positioning, exploring the external environment, etc., and developing a great strategic plan. And so that was my kind of philosophy of leadership. Game of chess, a competitive game. All the right moves need to be made, right? And if you tell people the logic, they'll follow you. Well, after 3 months in this new role, my boss, a wonderful person who became a very influential mentor in my career, a guy called CJ van Jaarsveld, chairman of the group, called me into his office after 3 months and said, okay, Pietersen, what surprised you in this new role? And I said, CJ, what really surprised me is how much time I've needed to spend on people issues, their concerns, their aspirations, their disappointments, their need for motivation, their need for recognition. I didn't ever anticipate spending this amount, more than half my time, on people issues. And he looked at me for a little while and then smiled. And he said, Pietersen, welcome to leadership. That really was the threshold of learning for me. And that doesn't make it straightforward or easy.
Right.
So the other thing, leading from that realization, I began to think that we need to have a structure for thinking about how we lead. It's not just about making great decisions. It's not just about exercising power either. Essentially, leadership is not about power, it's about service. So I thought, well, how do I structure my thinking around this idea that it's about people? And I've developed a Venn diagram that tells us that leadership essentially has 3 fundamental domains that interact and support each other. First domain of leadership is personal leadership. Who are we? What do we stand for? It's based on deep self-awareness, the development of a clear set of principles and beliefs that guide our actions and inspire others. That's where it begins. This is what you refer to as this mindset, the set of, it's all based on a foundation of that kind. Now, that establishes our basic character, and it makes us aware of who we are and what drives us. And it makes us choose the values according to which we will choose our actions and be specific and intentional. Personal leadership. Second domain of leadership is strategic leadership. You need to give the organization a clear sense of direction and a set of shared priorities for success. So you create unity of action in the right direction. Third domain of leadership is interpersonal leadership, is bringing out the best in others. And the way I think about these 3 domains working together is that if we really think deliberately about how we integrate them, that's our way of becoming integrated leaders. One of them alone is not enough. They support each other. And as we are confronted with different challenges, we need to go back to the structure and say, where am I maybe falling short here? Where do I need to put extra pressure? And then you seek feedback. Now, here's the interesting thing about feedback. There was a mayor in New York called Ed Koch. He used to walk around the streets and encounter people and say, how am I doing? Well, what are people going to say? I mean, a more important question is, how are you doing, actually? But we all need feedback. We all need to have truth tellers. And rather than saying to people, how do you think I'm doing? That's a kind of a paralyzing general question. I prefer to go to this framework and say, look, this is what it's about. Personal, strategic and interpersonal. Tell me how I'm doing on each one of these. Where can I improve as we go through time? And I got my leadership team always to think in the same way, so we can give constructive feedback within a structure of that kind. Helps us to be intentional and thoughtful about how we lead.
So interesting. And I've read some research around awareness, and a lot of leaders think that they have great self awareness, but very few do when you're looking at the criteria for having great self awareness and great awareness. And they broke it down into having awareness about yourself and how you view yourself and your values and all of those things, right? Having that deeper level of awareness about yourself. But I think an area where a lot of people struggle is understanding how their actions and how they are showing up is being interpreted by
Mm-hmm.
others. So it's having the awareness around how am I impacting the
Yes.
people around me? And with leadership, when you get more power, let's say, sometimes there can be a gap there where you're not fully understanding, oh, me sending out this email at, you know, let's say 8 p.m. on a Friday evening, how that could be impacting all of the people in your organization that get that email. Or so I think some of those things
Yes.
can be lost. So do you have any suggestions for how people can build that that broader sense of awareness? Any things that you've learned throughout your journey?
Yeah, this is where we're all learning our way to success. I don't
Hmm.
think there's any perfect formula except to be as aware as possible that your actions have impacts on others, and some of them are unintended consequences. The way I thought about it always was that as a leader, everything you do is symbolic. Every action you take, whether it's a verbal statement or simply an action without words, is interpreted by people. Now, if you walk into the office in the morning looking all downcast, that affects the whole mood of the people in the office. If you've got a spring in your step and a smile on your face and you say, "Hi, everybody, isn't it a lovely day?" it lifts up people. You
Yep.
know, you can't ask people to be motivated. Hey, you, would you please be motivated? And I've learned that paying attention to others is a very, very important thing. Being aware of the effect that you're having on others. I'll tell you a quick little anecdote along these lines. I've been an advisor to a company in South Africa for the last 20 years. And it's a family company. And one of the people I started to work with was actually a good personal friend. His son is now the CEO, and I'm very proud of him. He's like a surrogate son to me. He's done marvelous work. When I was last there and walking through their offices in Cape Town, um, it was noticeable to me, people kept saying before I started the meeting there, "Oh, we all love Ian. We love Ian. We love to follow him. He's a very transparent and authentic human being with sound values." And I wanted to say, "Tell me why you love Ian," right? And they would say various things about
Mhm.
him, his authenticity. And I noticed something through his behavior. We had to go from one office to another office to a different meeting. Along the way, a number of people passed along. And of course, traditionally, we'd say, "Oh, hi, Fred, hi, Mary," and just keep going. Well, he stopped each time. And for about 2 minutes, I was candidly getting a little impatient. I think, where do we get this
Yeah.
fellow? And he stopped and said, "Hi, Mary, how are you doing? I know that your son was in this tennis tournament. How did he do?"
Mhm.
"Oh, hi, Fred. I know your daughter broke her arm. And is that, healing okay now?" Or just ask a little question.
Mhm.
And people felt valued because he
Mhm.
spent time with them. And there is nothing more important in our lives than the time we have, because that is our lives. It's a timeline. And when you contribute a part of your life to somebody, to pay attention to them, it makes a huge difference, makes them feel valued and important. I had a colleague once, teaching a class, and I was sitting at the back talking about this theme. And he said, "Well, the way you need to think about it in practical terms is that everybody in your organization is walking around with a label around their necks, and the label says, 'Make me feel important.'" Now, it's so that's the kind of conscious part of it. We get into trouble when we unconsciously do something that offends others or demotivates them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're all imperfect. We're going to make mistakes. Now, the issue for me is learning. It's a question of how we learn to be more self-aware, because it's not an endowment that just descends from the sky. Some people have different baselines of doing that, others don't. We're all imperfect. I can think of no better thing than to have trusted colleagues, and some of them are subordinates actually, who will tell you the truth on these issues. There's a thing called the curse of power. As you get more senior, people tell you what you'd like to hear. That's their tendency. Suddenly your jokes get a little funnier. And it's difficult to get information to flow from the ground up because you're so distant from it. And if you don't take deliberate steps to counteract those problems, you get your awareness of what's going on around you. The reactions to your own behavior become distorted because of, everybody doesn't want to offend you. They want to tell you what you'd like to hear. So it's very important for us to develop that self-awareness. I'll tell you a mistake.
So interesting.
No, you go ahead because I'm talking too long here. Go ahead.
No, I just was going to say that that's so interesting. And I've heard about that. And I was curious, what do you feel, or what do you think could be effective for getting true, accurate feedback? I've heard some different opinions here. Like you need to have, one or two people who will just tell you like it is, and you need to make sure that you have those people in your circle. But what works for leaders who have this issue? Like, I don't know if people are being totally honest with me because they don't want to offend me or they don't want to get in trouble. Like, any thoughts on how you can overcome that?
Well, I think there are two sources. One is our own sources of reflection and deliberately being aware of the impact you're having on others. To start your thinking from the outside in, not from the inside out. Not what do I want to say, but what do others really need to hear and what's important to them. I always felt there were three questions in the minds of employees all the time. Question one is, what are we striving to achieve and why should I care? Second is, what's expected of my department and what's expected of me? And the third one is, how will we measure success and what's in it for me? And it's very seldom money. It's all about fulfillment. So you start, I think, with this thing of what are the questions in the minds of employees right now, to think deliberately about that. And not what do I need to say, but what are their needs? I once needed to close a part of our business when I was running the foods business for Unilever in the USA. We needed to close a plant in Hammond in Indiana. And there's a tough crowd there, etc. I was told, I was warned, don't tell them in advance because productivity will go down and they'll be very angry, etc. And I thought about this advice, and it was, broadly felt that we should wait until, I was told, 6 weeks beforehand. Don't tell them before. Well, at this stage, we were 6 months before the intended closure. And I came to the conclusion that, number one, just on an analytical basis, it's likely they'll find out anyway. And if they find out from others, they won't trust you because they'll say, well, why didn't you tell us? Why did I need to hear it from? And then you owned up and said, yes, it's true. So I said to our operations guy, Martin Van Buren, I said, Martin, I want to tell them. He said, when? I said, now. I want to go to Chicago and tell them. He said, you're taking a big risk. I said, well, all decisions involve risk, but I'm thinking of them. And we've got this attitude that because we're senior, we can cope with difficulty and change, but those below us can't. And I think they probably can cope with it better than we can if we tell them the truth. Now, let's also have a scheme that enables them to earn some money for productivity. We worked out a scheme to say, if you maintain productivity where it is now, you get X bonus. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we went along I told them this, and I said, it's a very painful thing we have to do, but here's why. But I'm terribly sorry I have to do it, and it's very hard for me to be a messenger of this. I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about your families, and I want to ease the pathway. And I said, well, here's the bonus for maintaining productivity, et cetera, et cetera. We'll have outplacement services that starts tomorrow. In terms of finding you another job, you can start working on that now. Doesn't matter. It's
Mhm.
fine. We've got 6 months still in this job, but hopefully you can transition very smoothly, and we'll help you do that. And the outplacement would go on for another 6 months afterwards. Well, I visited there after 3 months, and the productivity had risen by a significant amount from what it had been in the past 3 years.
Hmm.
So I spoke to the union leader. We were standing in the cafeteria. He was a big 6'7" man. And I looked up at him and I said, well, this is a remarkable thing I'm witnessing. How come the productivity has gone up? He said, it's pride, sir. And, I sat back and, I thought, well, this is an amazing thing. Now, one thing I've left out is after making the speech to people telling the plant was going to close, I expected a lot of anger and angry questions. I got applause. And I
Ah,
said to Martin, oh my God, they misunderstood me. I've just told them they're out of a job and they're applauding. Why? And he said, during the applause, he whispered at me, he said, I think they're applauding our honesty. Now, that for me was a very, very important thing, to be totally honest with people in hard times and good times. And that's a way of tuning in and saying, I respect you and I respect your ability to deal with difficulty. And the only thing I can do is to ease the pathway as best I can in your interests. Those are little lessons that I've learned, and makes you more deeply aware of the impact on others. So it's your internal reflection together with getting, I think, insights from others. And I think that's a skill that can be developed over time, is to get that honest feedback from others. Now, you're the expert in this. I'm happy to get advice from you. What different things could we do beyond what I've mentioned here?
I mean, Willie, that story you just shared was so impactful. And your ability to follow your own sense of what was right. And, I'm sure that was very hard for you to do that. But people know when something's in the air, like, oh, there might be something happening. And I think the hardest thing for people to handle is that uncertainty and the not knowing. Because as you said, like once people know, then that takes away that all of that fear of the unknown of, is this going to happen, is it not? And then they can start to plan and they can become actionable, because if we're not quite sure, we don't really know what to do next. So I think that was really a smart decision, to do that. And I think another really key component here, which you mentioned with, when you were shadowing or visiting that I forget what his name was, but you were saying that you were getting feedback on how great of a job he was doing, and he was stopping in the hallway to talk to
Yes. Yeah,
some
no,
of the
yeah,
employees. Building connection, right? Which is really an art form, and just showing people that they're valued and
yes,
giving people your full attention. I
correct.
mean, in these modern times with cell phones and technology, our attention is gold. So, people know if you are fully present versus you're distracted, you're thinking about what's next, you're glancing at your phone. I mean, all of those behaviors, I think, are really important that we have awareness around, and we're able to be fully present to build that connection so people hopefully can feel more secure and have that psychological safety to be able to have sometimes those trickier conversations. But I mean, you've shared so many gems that are incredibly valuable. We are starting to wind down. I'm going to give you one final question, but before I do, is there anything else you'd like to share about your book? I'm going to put a link to it in the episode details, but anything else that we haven't covered that you think would be a really fun last thing to add before that final question?
Well, beyond saying again that I think a major theme in the book is that it's all about leadership. It's all about leadership is all about people
Yep.
and inspiring people. The other point of emphasis in the book is that we're all involved in a learning journey. And I think in Darwinian terms, that in a changing environment, the key is our ability to successfully adapt. The lifespan of organizations on the S&P 500 is about half of human lives. It's around 45 years. That's very short. I think the main responsibility of leaders is the sustainability of their organizations over time. And that means we have to create learning organizations. And that means we have to be learners ourselves, and then imbue the organization with that capability. Those would be my two themes. It's about people and it's about learning and renewal.
I love that. Yeah, being able to adapt, that's huge. So final question that I have for you, Willie, is knowing what you know now, what advice, if any, would you have given to yourself from 10 years ago?
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Okay. That the best way to teach, because, teaching again is a journey of discovery and learning, and it's actually the best way in the world I've ever discovered in order to learn is to teach. I don't use the word teach anymore. I use the word learn. We're learning together, right?
Love it.
Yeah. 10 years ago, I would have told myself, do more interactive and dialogue, teach in a more Socratic way by asking great questions, provoke dialogue, dig deeply, and then people will learn more thoroughly than just listening to you droning on about something.
Mm. That's really great advice to have people have that inflection on how they feel about different subjects. Well, this has been incredible, Willie. Thank you so much for taking time with me today. It was really, really fun to be able to get some of your wisdom and learn from all the amazing experiences that you've had. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristel. It's been a pleasure.